everyone, welcome to Rights for Women, a podcast about celebrating women's voices and supporting women writers. I'm Pamela Cook, women's fiction author, writing teacher, mentor and podcaster. I'm excited to be back in 2022 with some amazing guests for the podcasts. I have so many great interviews already lined up and look forward to organising more. And of course, there are plenty of great chats on the backlist at rightsforwomen.com if you haven't caught up with them yet, or wherever you get your podcasts, which is probably where you're listening right now. I'm recording this podcast on unceded Dharawal country and would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work. I've just finished recording a fabulous chat with Josephine Moon. Jo writes fiction and non-fiction, but mostly fiction. They're warm-hearted contemporary mashups of uplit and foodie lit, or foodie fiction, as Jo likes to call it. Stories about life, love, careers and food, sometimes set in Australia, sometimes overseas, and always with a great feel-good vibe. Jo's novels are published internationally and her collective sales are approaching 250,000. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? She describes her novels as books like chocolate brownies, rich, inviting, a treat for the soul, but with chunky nuts to chew on. I love that. And a dash of sea salt that lingers on the tongue. She's written 7 fiction books and 2 non-fiction books, including The Tea Chest, 3 Gold Coins, The Cake Maker's Wish, and her last book, which came out in 2021, The Jam Queens. When I say last, I mean her most recent book. Jo lives in Noosa, on the hinterland of Noosa in Australia, with her husband, son, and a tribe of animals that, despite her best intentions, seems to expand every year. So Jo and I have quite a few things in common, one of them being our love of animals, in particular horses, which we chat about in the podcast. Last year, on March 26, 2021, Jo came out as autistic. It's an experience she describes in her podcast that she started, Autist in Residence, which is such a great name, as terrifying. The diagnosis has made a lot of sense of things that have happened in Jo's life, and she's made it part of her mission to share her journey with the world in the hope of helping others. Jo's someone I've been wanting to have on the podcast for some time, so when I was planning this year's schedule, she was top of the list. And it's been so lovely to spend the last hour or so chatting to Jo about so many things, largely about her autism. I was really curious to find out how she feels that has impacted on her writing, on her creative process, how the diagnosis and the coming out has impacted on her life as a writer and her life as a woman. And of course, we talk about her books. Another little fantastic accomplishment that she achieved last year as part of her research for the Jam Queens. So I'm not going to spoil that. I'll let you find out all about that. So thank you for listening. I hope you love this interview with Jo Moon, and I'll be back next week with another fabulous guest on Rights for Women. Thank you so much, Jo Moon, for joining me on Rights for Women. And, we were just chatting, and we're going to be talking quite a bit today about your new identity. You've been diagnosed with autism, but also, of course, about your writing journey. And I thought we might actually start with that for people who maybe aren't familiar with you and your writing. If you could tell us a little bit about basically how you came to be a writer and how you got to be where you are now with it all.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me on. It's really lovely. I see you on Instagram all the time. And of course, we have this lovely shared connection with horses and everything, it's really lovely. And so yeah, it's I'm sure we could do an hour's chat just on horses, actually.
I'm sure. But horses are on my list to ask you about too. So.
It's my favourite subject, so that's good. So as far as writing goes, I think like most writers, I was a huge reader as a child. And so, Enid Blyton, Elaine Mitchell's Silver Brumby was a huge inspiration for me, and had me just hooked as a reader. And I wrote my first novel when I was 9, which is all about horses. And I don't know, it had sort of always been with me, I think. But I sort of had a couple of false starts in terms of uni. Like I thought I wanted to be a vet. I now know that there's no way I could have been a vet because I just would never. I'd just be crying constantly. I'm just way too emotional, and I'm quite needle phobic because when you have horses, you end up having to give injections, for various things, and I'm always just like, oh man, I hate this. So that could never have happened. And then I sort of pursued environmental science, and then there were loads and loads of statistics and that, and I was like, man, me and statistics just never going to get on. And so at that point I had to really reassess what on earth I was doing. And I sort of thought, I seem to be good at this writing gig. Maybe I should be looking in that area. I mean, in hindsight, someone somewhere should have been offering, like when I was at school, there was no kind of people sitting you down and going, well, let's have a look at what you're good at, what you're not, what you're interested in. It was just like, oh, pick some courses off your QTAC form and off you go. And it was sort of
hope for
no
the
real
best.
guidance. And so I then pursued journalism and film and media and sort of went on from there. I then became an English teacher. And in my first year teaching English and film and TV, I just knew I couldn't be a teacher forever. And I went and did a course with the Queensland Writers Centre. This was pre, sort of internet stuff. So it was very much in person. And I came away just going, this is it. This is what I need to do. I need to be a full-time writer. And the funny thing I think about that now is that sort of the reasons I became a writer or wanted to be a writer are sort of challenged constantly now. So the appeal then was very much, I can stay at home. I don't have to talk to people. I can write and go into my own little world. I can, I can be really sort of a bit of a recluse. And of course now that's just not the case. You're sort of expected to be constantly on social media, on podcasts, and then, out doing things around. Obviously not in the past couple of years with COVID around, but, normally beating the pavement and doing lots and lots of face-to-face stuff and really high energy stuff that really drains me, which we might circle back to later. I think. But yeah, that's kind of how it just started. But I started writing and I wrote and wrote and I wrote 10 manuscripts in about 12 years. Wow. And couldn't really work out what sort of writer I wanted to be. And when I finally sort of worked that out, I wrote the T-test and it was picked up and given a 2-book deal pretty quickly. So
great.
Happened slowly and then really fast at the end.
Yeah, it's often the case, isn't it, that story? And people think, oh, you were so lucky you had got a debut book out, but there's so much work that goes behind that.
That's right. There's 9 dead novels behind it.
So were you teaching all that time, Jo? Were you working as a teacher?
For some of it. So I wrote while I was working full-time and I wrote part-time and I wrote casually and I did a lot of jobs. And it's something that I've learnt through my autism diagnosis actually is I've sort of had 4 big careers in my life, very distinct careers, and I have actually burnt out of every one of them. And I now know that is actually really a classic experience for an autistic person, that you just burn out completely of what you're doing and you try something else hoping that one will work, and then it doesn't and you burn out of that and you sort of go on this cycle. So yeah, I've done a lot of different things.
So what was it like when you got that first book contract?
To be honest, I was really in shock. I was massively in shock. Like I really found it hard to process that because I had been working for so long. I'd had over 100 rejections. I used to keep a spreadsheet and I let it go when I got to 100. I just found that's depressing. And which I know sounds a lot, right? But I've been writing for 12 years. So that's sort of, it's spread out over those 12 years. It's not quite as terrible as it sounds, but
it's not unusual either. That's not an unusual story, is it, for writers?
Yeah. And back then too, you were still having to print out entire manuscripts and post them off and send the return delivery, and they'd come back in the mail, these big things addressed to you, and you'd be like, oh damn, that's a manuscript that's come back. And so it was a lot more heart-wrenching and expensive as well. But I forgot what we were talking about. We do this.
Oh, just what it was like to get that first contract.
So it was really, really in shock because by that point, I would have given my novel away for free. Like I was just like, I didn't have no expectations on it at all. I just wanted it completed and have completed its journey, which is you write so someone reads it, right? So that's why you write. So I wanted that cycle to be complete, and that was my highest goal. And I had no idea that this was an actually commercially successful book that people would want and want more of. So it was really gobsmacking to me. Like, the whole thing was, I just couldn't believe that it was real. And then they gave me, 2-book deal and I didn't have a book written. And then that's the whole massive pressure in itself. And so, it took a really long time to sort of come to grips with that and not keep waiting for it all to fall over, I guess. Yeah.
It's a big adjustment, isn't it? It's a massive change in life. So especially after you say having those, worked for 12 years on 10 books, and then all of a sudden you bang, where's your next book? We want to publish it.
And when it finally happened, I had a 6-week-old baby and I was like, are you serious? Like this right now?
Yeah, thank you, universe.
The timing was like, oh, I'm really grateful, but holy smokes, So those first sort of 5 years of my career were just so hard, such a hard slog with a little person. And we were renovating houses and moving houses and all this sort of stuff.
Course. So, yeah. How long ago was that, Jo? When was your first?
So I got my agent and offers in 2012, but my first book came out in 2014.
Right. Okay. So you've had 7 books published, is that right?
I've got 7 novels and 2 non-fiction books. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just working on my 8th novel now.
Yeah, great.
And 8's my favourite number, so that's good.
Perfect. We'll have a chat about that one hopefully a little bit later. So as we were talking at the beginning, when we first started chatting, last year in March, I believe 2021, you were diagnosed with autism.
Correct.
Can you tell us about that, getting to that point in your life and how that diagnosis came about for you?
Yeah, so it really should have come about 5 years earlier when 2 other members of my family were diagnosed with autism. And when you go through that process, family members are asked, whether you're a child or an adult, your family members are asked to fill in forms reflecting on your kind of characteristics and that kind of thing. So I'd filled out all these forms and I went back with my family to the psychologist and said every single thing in this, particularly in the sensory processing difficulty part of the chart. So sensory processing is things like being stressed by loud noises, funny little bits inside your socks, the textures of food, the textures of, wind, noises. I'm always the person running around going, what is that noise? What is that noise? No one else can hear it but me. It took me to literally last year to realise that other people couldn't hear lights humming.
Wow.
I just thought everybody could hear that, and because it would drive me crazy, lights humming, and I didn't realise that's actually unusual. So I went back and I said, everything, I am ticking everything in this section. And she sort of gave me a really hard look, and she said, well, your eye contact's too good, you're not autistic, which is a ridiculous thing to say because you can't. One, not every autistic person struggles with eye contact. 2, eye contact is a learned behaviour. So whether it's comfortable or not, a lot of us can do it because that's what we're expected to do. So you can play the game, basically. Doesn't mean that it's, a good thing. So I had to work through a lot of anger about that, actually, that I could have had answers 5 years previously if that person had actually known more and been more on the ball. And then 3 years later, we had a psychologist visiting our house, doing a home visit for someone, and she just kind of casually dropped in the middle of the lounge room that she considered me a high-functioning autistic. And I was like, what?
Just out of the blue.
Just out of nowhere. And that was sort of the end of the conversation. And I was left just going, what the hell? Like, I don't understand this. And then I sort of ran it past a psychologist I was seeing at the time for grief processing, grief counselling. And I said, this is what's happened. It's really shaken me up. And we sort of talked through some things, and she said, look, I don't specialise in autism, which should have been the first clue. But I would say, from what you're saying, that you have a social communication disorder. At which point I was like, well, now I feel so much worse. I feel just like this big. And I kind of just shut down on that then for a couple of years. And eventually I felt like, one, this has just been bugging me, for a couple of years. And I feel like, one, I want it resolved for myself. And 2, I feel like I owe it to other members of my family to have this information or not. Because that makes a big difference to how you relate to people. If you know that you've got the same kind of neurotype or not is a big deal.
Yeah.
So I found a group that specialise in diagnosing female autism, or autism in women. Women assigned female at birth anyway, let's say that, because there's a whole range of gender diversity in there that can get confusing as well. So, that's kind of how it happens, basically. And it's a long wait list. The wait lists are huge, and it was a long process. It was big long interviews, tons of paperwork, but that's where we got to. And by the time I got to the final sort of, I'm going to give you back my findings, I was like, at this point, I'd be surprised if you said I was autistic. I'd be surprised if you said I wasn't. I just was, I had no idea by that point. And then she said, well, congratulations, you're autistic. And I was like, you're kidding. What? It was just such a mind. But then when she sort of started explaining things and we started talking through things like, the burnout cycles and things like that, and I was like, oh man, this just explains my entire life. And it's been a lot, it's only 10 months. I say it's only 10 months, and it, to still daily things pop up in my head where I go, that's what that was. That's what that thing that happened in year 5 was all about. That's what, it's a long, at this age, at 45, it's a lot of processing. To sort of reevaluate everything.
Yeah. So has it been a relief in a way for you to have that diagnosis? Yeah,
absolutely. Because I know, I've always known I'm different, that I just don't think like other people, that I feel really alone, I feel wrong. And the sad thing is, when you grow up not knowing that you are autistic, you spend your whole life being told that you're wrong. So you're always getting things wrong, you're doing things wrong, you're saying things wrong. And according to other people, you're not actually, because you do just fine. There's just a cultural communication problem between, neurodiverse people and neurotypical people. But so you just grow up thinking it's you the whole time, and there's something wrong with me, something wrong with me. Why can't someone tell me what's wrong with me? So it's a lot of negative self-talk for decades. So it's a lot.
It must be a lot to process in a positive and I guess a more negative way, like you say, reflecting back on experiences that have left a bit of a scar, I guess, on you in some ways. And then
absolutely. Absolutely. But the other bonus then is that you find, and this was what I didn't expect, was then you tap into this massive online community of other neurodiverse people, and suddenly you see yourself everywhere, and for the first time you're like, that's me, and you're like, I'm normal, I'm a normal neurodiverse person. I'm not wrong, I'm completely right, neurodiverse person, and I see myself everywhere, and you feel connected, and you've found your neurokin is the word.
Neurokin, I love that.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, I guess, of the internet now, isn't it? Like 20 years ago or whatever, how many years ago, people didn't have access to all that information and those connections. So
exactly. It's great for that.
So Jo, can you explain to lay people like myself in neurological terms what is autism? And there are a lot of myths around about autism too, aren't there? Maybe if you could tell us some of those and bust them for us.
Wow. So many, I don't even know where to start. So first of all, what it is, I mean, that depends who you talk to. But at its core, it's a neurotype. So basically it's like having a different operating system. It's like having a Mac versus a Windows operating system in your brain. So there's nothing wrong with a Mac and there's nothing wrong with a Windows system. They just operate differently, but they won't talk to each other. So that's kind of where you're at. So it's there from birth. It's not something that you acquire via vaccine. That's one of the myths. It's not something you get any other way. It's genetic. There's very strong genetic markers. There's genetic races going on all around the world trying to identify the full spectrum of the genetic matching codes. And there's a lot of questions about that as to whether that's a good thing or not. But basically, if you think about, if anyone has done science, biology, you know that the strength of an ecosystem is based on its diversity. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the stronger it is. Farmers would know this. If you monocrop entirely, and something comes out and your wheat is susceptible to whatever, and you lose your entire crop, then obviously you've lost everything. But if you have a diverse, farming arrangement, you might lose your wheat, but you've kept your pumpkins and your oranges and everything else, right? So the more diversity we have, the stronger we are and the healthier we are. So there are very, very old genes that go back thousands of years to do with autism. It's always been around. So what that means, though, is that autistic people tend to have particular struggles, and I think more and more in the modern world, because there's so much more coming at us all the time. So much less downtime, so much less ability to process. I heard it's a woman up here called Leonie Dawson, she's an entrepreneur and artist. She's online, she's big online, does a lot of e-courses. I heard her describe it one day as like, we're really exhausted a lot of the time. And the problem is it's like trying to upload or download 12 kilobyte photograph versus a 24 megabyte photograph. So we take in the 24 megs of everything around us all the time. So all the little details, all the sensory stuff. And you take it all in and then you somehow have to get rid of it all at the end of the day as well. And that's a lot harder and a lot slower than 12 kilobytes of photo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. They're great ways of describing it.
Yeah, I liked that one when I heard it. In terms of the myths, people still believe that only boys have autism, just out and out wrong. I think the most dangerous myths are that autistic people lack empathy, just out and out wrong. There's so much research to show that autistic people can make amazing therapists, psychologists, nurses, etc., because they actually have very, very high levels of empathy. And a lot of us have hyper empathy, which I do as well, which actually just kind of means that we feel everyone's stuff all the time. Yeah. And, like for me, I really feel animals' pain. And so if something flicks through my social media feed that's got some sort of animal in distress on it, like that can floor me for the rest of the day. Like I can just unhinge me completely because I just can't let go of the pain of that image or that situation, for example. So a lot of us have hyper empathy. There's still a myth out there that autistic people don't feel pain, which is super dangerous. Now, having said that, autistic people can have different reactions to pain, and sometimes that's hypersensitive and sometimes it's hyposensitive. So sometimes they can be a bit like, oh, it's a bit of a twinge, and there's actually an appendicitis. Or, you've bumped something, but suddenly your whole arm's on fire with pain, So you can be sort of hyper, but it's certainly not, it's just such a dangerous myth. It's just there's a myth that obviously vaccines cause autism, just wrong. There's a myth that, everyone's on a linear scale. So you're very autistic at this end, you're not very autistic at that end. And really it's much more of a different days and different times, and depending on your environment, it can move your ability to, focus, concentrate, participate, take care of yourself, changes from day to day, depending on what's going on. Some people still say autism is the extreme male brain. Again, just wrong.
I haven't heard that one.
It's just wrong. Again, and this harks back to the fact that people used to think only males had autism. The idea that everyone's on the spectrum somewhere, they're not. You're either actually on the autistic spectrum or you're not. When we talk about the spectrum, we're talking about the diversity of the autistic community. So that's a big one to understand. Is not every autistic person is different. There's just as much variety in the autistic community as there is in the neurotypical community.
Yeah.
So gosh, there's lots.
Yeah.
No, someone just said to me today, she listened to one of my podcasts that I did on autism, and she said, "Oh, you've got such a lovely speaking voice. I guess," slays that myth that autistic people have monotone voices. I was like, oh yes, there's that one too. But
add that to the list.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot.
There really are, aren't there? And I've listened to a few episodes of your podcast, Jo, and you address a lot of this in there too, which is great.
Thank you.
The myth you were mentioning, and it's come up a couple of times as we've been chatting, is this idea that only boys or men get autism. And interestingly, I was just last night, flicking through the news thing on my phone, and an article came up on ADHD, and it was exactly the same myth that women, can't have ADHD or don't have it. And so many more women now are also being diagnosed with ADHD, as adults. So is this because of, the testing that was done? Like, where does all that come from?
So the best book to read for this is a book called Neurotribes by Steve Silberman. It's a really famous book. It's been around for a few years now. I read it. I have the hard copy, but I listened to it on audio because it's a tome. It is a big, big book, and it goes through the whole history basically of autism from the 1930s up to today, essentially. And it is horrifying in so many parts as to just how mind-blowingly badly autistic people have been managed, treated and mistreated and experimented on, and all these horrendous things that have happened in history. It also explains so much of why we are where we are today. And so if you read that book, the sort of autism was first kind of coined by Hans Asperger. So a lot of people would have heard of Asperger's syndrome.
Yep.
So years ago, I would have been called somebody with Asperger's syndrome, which was essentially considered high functioning autistic. So Hans Asperger studied, so he was a Austrian pediatrician. He studied mostly very young white Austrian boys and created profiles and tests based on young white Austrian boys.
Right.
And those tests kind of kept being used over and over and over again for decades and decades and decades. And it really wasn't until female psychologists and female doctors started getting sort of a bit more involved with this from about the 60s on,
right,
that things started to shift a little bit. But it is only been, to my knowledge, in the past 5 or 6 years that we've had female-specific testing.
Right.
So there's a great group in Australia called Reframing Autism. They talk about, there's a lot of psychologists will talk about female autism, or Reframing Autism talk about it as internalized autism. So this idea that our old stereotypes and understanding of autism are based on externalized presentations. So those stereotypes that you've seen on TV, movies, maybe shouting, headbanging, Rain Man
comes to mind. Yeah,
Rain Man is, and then Rain Man sort of put out this idea that everyone was a savant as well. Like,
that's right. Yep.
Which is very rare, and you see that a lot on TV too, like Criminal Minds, and So they say it's more like internalized, because some boys can have that sort of more internalized presentation, and that's more of shutdowns,
right,
losing your words, freezing, that sort of just shutting down rather than a kind of explosive sort of presentations.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, and then there's just a male medical bias, and this is a really well-known thing. You can go Google this. It's, up until really recently, medications were only tested on male rats, never female rats, because gosh, female rats had hormone cycles. We don't want to deal with that, so we'll just test male rats. And so women are just considered to be little versions of men with strange hormone things, but we'll just ignore them and we'll give them all the medicine we tested on males. Like even my husband, who's a physio, said one day, a lecturer or someone said they used to have, joints like hips and knee joints, but there were only ever male hips and knee joints. And then someone sort of had to go, females actually have different bodies. We might need female hip and knee joints. Like, like it just goes on and on and on and on. So it's all kind of wrapped up in all of that. Yeah.
Thankfully, we're making so much progress in these work. I mean, things that should have changed years and years ago, but now there is so much more progress in that area, isn't there? It's great.
There is. It is. A slow awareness. There's good progress being made, but it's exciting and it's frustratingly slow at the same time.
Yeah, I can understand. So when you were diagnosed, Jo, you did make the decision, you came out publicly in a blog post, and you've got your podcast and everything about autism. How was that for you, that sort of actually publicly coming out with, I've got autism?
Yeah, it was terrifying, actually. But I guess there'd been, a bit of a lead up to that, which was once I had my identification, I practiced coming out on, obviously the people closest to me to see. And I was well prepared for some negative responses. And from what I've read online, that's pretty typical. People get some pretty full-on negative responses. And I think largely because everybody's been sort of saturated in a very negative view of autism. So they're sort of, I don't know, they don't want you to be autistic. Well, you can't be autistic. Well, they've done something wrong if you're autistic. Or, like there's a whole bunch of stuff there. So I sort of practiced on people, and it was really exhausting. And so I decided that Mondays would be coming out Monday. So every Monday I would practice on someone, and some people are told in person, and then I was like, this is exhausting. And so some people I emailed, some people I did by phone, some people I texted, and then eventually I sort of, that day that I put that post up, I had no plans to do it. I literally just woke up with this enormous, it's kind of a writing pressure actually. You probably feel like there's like a story in you that just has to get out, and you have to sit down and write it then. It was a bit like that. It was just like, oh, I have to write this down, or I'm never going to get. I can't move on until this is done. But it was terrifying, and I couldn't look at the post for a really long time. I really expected some negative kickback, some trolls, some all sort. And but I didn't get anything.
Okay, great.
I still expect it will come my way, but
yeah,
the internet being what it is. But I didn't. Everyone was really, really lovely.
yeah.
And I had previous to that, I had come out to my publisher and my agent as well,
Right.
much earlier than that, and sort of because I was in a big burnout phase, and
Was that around the time that Jam Queens came out? Was it around that time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a lot going on.
I was a mess at that point, yeah, and I was really just like, I need out of this. I can't do this anymore. I felt like I needed to quit, but once I had that knowledge and knew how I could help myself, I could find a way through it. So that, I mean, that identification really probably saved my career there.
That's amazing. So what steps have you taken to prevent or, to ease that sort of feeling of burnout and to enable you to continue with your writing, for instance? I guess, how have you learnt to manage the autism?
It's very much an ongoing process. And then, of course, COVID doesn't make it any easier, because one of the things we autists typically do not like is changes to routine and disruption to plans. And I'm no different. And so it feels like every single day something changes, something's different. School's not going back now, whatever it is. And it just really messes with my head. And so I find it extremely difficult to write unless I have kind of the perfect conditions to write. So which means I need everyone out of the house, preferably. I need to be in my room, I need earbuds in my ears with soothing music going on to create a bit of a, barrier to the outside world.
A cocoon.
And I do, and I need my chai, and I need whatever, and I just don't deal well with being able to hear, if the child's home and TV's on, and I just don't deal with that. And I need to be able to leave my room and walk and get a cup of tea and come back again without somebody going, Mom, can I have whatever? Or do you know where my car keys are? Or whatever it is. That just sort of, so I'm really high needs in that respect. And so I haven't really done very well about that, I don't think. The thing I have done well, which sort of was one of the real sticking points at the time that this all happened, was I was in contract negotiations at the time, and I was just every time I spoke to Alex, my agent, for about 2 months, I was just crying. I was just sitting there crying constantly. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do a book a year. I can't go touring, book a year. If you're on a book a year, you're writing, you're editing, you're publicising, you're social mediaing, you're doing all this stuff, and I just can't do it. It splits my focus in too many ways. I don't have the energy to do it, but publishers, that's what they want. Yeah. And I don't like letting people down, and I don't like reneging on commitments. But I ended up having to. I ended up just saying, I can't write a book a year, just can't do it. So that's taken a lot of pressure off, definitely.
Oh, good.
I don't have a book coming out next month. It will be the month after, which I sort of normally would, and I'm so relieved about that. That would be just not what I need right now. So that's made a huge difference. How that plays out in terms of sales and whatnot, I have no idea, but I couldn't sustain it the way it was going.
Yeah.
And I had terrible tendonitis and illness for 3 years. It's still there, but I'm sort of functionally typing now. My body was breaking down. Everything was breaking down. So, I guess that's the biggest one at the moment. It's just, let's just slow this right down. Slow down.
Yeah. What about in terms, Jo, of your sort of creativity, writing process, that sort of thing? Like when you think back before you knew that you were autistic, and then, even now post the diagnosis, how do you think that having autism impacts on that aspect of your life, your creativity and your writing, in terms of your imagination and actually creating stories and things like that?
I guess probably nothing has changed, except that I can now see things. So I now know, for example, that autistic people are well known for having hyper-focusing abilities. So if we get the thing that we're passionate about, you do not stand in our way. Like we just, so if that sort of, like I was saying, like that, if that writing train turns up, that's like, this thing needs to be written right now, I have to write that thing right now. And that's, so that's good in terms of productivity. If you can just get everything out of the way and just ride that hyper-focus, that's brilliant. It also means you can be highly distracted or hyper-focused in a totally different area like, I don't know, somehow now I need to plant acres of flowers out in my garden, like, yeah, I can get totally distracted doing that too, but at least I can sort of notice it now and know what it is. And rather than going, I've got this great new idea and it could be amazing, and no, it's just a brief hyper-focus thing and it'll pass in a week's time. I think it's interesting now writing at the moment, because I'm kind of second guessing myself a little bit in the sense that I write things. So one of the pieces of feedback I've always gotten with my books is, I love your descriptions. You've got so much description, etc. Now, not everyone's a description person, so some people don't like that. Other people who love it really love it, and I really love it. Like, I'm a big world builder, so it's really important to me to build really detailed worlds. And now I sort of write things and I go, that's a really autistic way of writing. Like that's what we love.
Like you're sort of judging yourself with that.
Yeah. Like I sort of go, that's what autistic people love. We love detail. We love, all that sensory stuff's massively important, or like all of that I sort of fill my books with. And then now I'm kind of going, I don't know, maybe, not many people are autistic. So the majority of my readers and typical readers, maybe they don't want to read this stuff. So now I'm kind of going,
that's hard.
God,
that's
how
really
much do I put in? Yeah, it is. I really don't know. I'm sort of going to have to rely a bit on editors. I mean, at the same time, I kind of go, well, I've written 7 books. They've all done pretty well. Clearly something connects somewhere. But I do think I will never be the person who has that runaway sort of big runaway success, because I don't connect with enough people's brain types to write the thing that they want to read. And it's kind of why I wrote my first book, because I couldn't find a book that I really wanted to read. Like, I feel really disconnected from a lot of things I read. And it's very rare for me to just go, oh, that book just really got me, sort of was one of my motivations to write, was to really just get the world I wanted to read. So I know that I'm never going to be that sort of mass seller. So I don't know. I'm still very much trying to figure that stuff out. And but then I kind of go, at the moment I'm writing a book that's got autistic characters in it.
I was going to ask you about that.
And I'm sort of going, well, this is the way they think, then surely we need to write it that way. But then maybe people don't want to read it. So I don't know. I'm feeling very confused about that at the moment.
Well, I think you said you're at second draft stage too, didn't you? Which is a massive second guessing yourself type stage as well.
I think so too, And I'm kind of looking at the first quarter and going, I don't know about that. And the rest of it's kind of, which is pretty normal for a second draft. And I'll just send it to my publisher and she'll probably tell me what, like, your first quarter is terrible. And I'll go, I know it is. It always is. And then it sort of improves. So it is a tricky phase where you're just kind of going, oh God, I don't know.
It's great to have, like,
maybe ask me 2 books down.
But at least you've got that trusted editor, you've already got that relationship, and with your publisher, and that will be great support for you.
For sure.
So I was going to ask you about your next book. Can you tell us anything about it, or is it a little bit too soon to reveal much?
Probably a little too soon. It's probably a little too soon.
We'll keep that one on the back burner. No, that's all right. No, I don't want to intrude. That's fine. But The Jam Queens was your most recent book, which came out this time last year. Just for people who may not have heard of that, tell us a little bit about The Jam Queens and what that's all about.
It's so hard to bring your head out of one. So The Jam Queens is about a family of jam queens, like competitive jam makers in the Barossa Valley in South Australia. And it's 3 generations of women. It's actually 4 generations of women, really, from the one family who all taking a journey on the GAN, the historic train from Darwin down to Adelaide. And there's some, fair few family. It's really a story about mothers and daughters and about family, the way families kind of over time sort of pull apart, but then sort of come back together again, and how they sort of move on. And so there's a bit of romance in there, and there's a lot of jam making, a lot of great GAN vicarious travelling.
Great. Have you been on the GAN?
Yeah, I went on research.
Fantastic.
I took my sister with me and we discovered our inner 80-year-old women, because there were loads of 80-year-old women on there who were climbing bunks and getting up and down. We were so inspired. We were like, we want to be these people when we're 80. Yeah, it was awesome. Really good. And interestingly, when I listened to that book back on audio, which I love doing because it always sounds different than it sounded in my head. So it always kind of a bit of a, oh, wow, it sounds really interesting. I realised about halfway through the book that one of those characters in there is absolutely autistic.
Oh, really?
Heard that, and I had no idea. I hadn't done it intentionally, but I just went, oh, man, she's so autistic. So, yeah, I've definitely done that. Definitely done that in a couple of my books. Just up there
in your subconscious, see, floating around. Yeah. Yeah. And food is also quite a big part of your writing, isn't it, Jo? You're a bit of a foodie.
Yeah, I do love the food. I do hyper focus on foods one after the other, and I love. And I'm very much because I am so driven by sensory stuff. I'm very much a method writer in that sense. So whatever food I'm working on, I have to learn how to. I have to eat lots of it, of course, and I have to learn how to make it. And I just do that big, info dump into my brain, everything about it, and just dive into it and really love it. So it's a really fun part of my books is the foodie stuff. Yeah.
Did you master the art of jam making?
Well, I'm going to, in short, say yes, because I won the Royal Brisbane Show jam making competition for strawberry jam.
Oh, yes.
Got a blue ribbon.
I love it. That's definitely method writing for sure.
It's a classic. I'd never made jam in my life, and I thought I need to actually practice. If my characters are going to do this, I have to teach myself how to make jam. And because they were competitive jam makers, I thought, well, I'll get all the paperwork and I'll put it through just so I understand the process.
For the process,
it gets delivered and everything. And my sister rang me from the Echo and said, how would you know if your jam had won? I said, I don't know. I suppose they'd send me a certificate or something. She goes, well, I'm standing in front of your jam right now and it's got a blue ribbon on it. And I just laughed. I just laughed and laughed and laughed. I thought it was hilarious.
I love that. That is gold. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And of course, we can't not have a conversation about horses, Jo. As you mentioned at the beginning, we're both massive horse lovers. Where does your passion for horses come from? Right back to your childhood, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. It's a very auty thing, that one. Riders and horse people. Yeah, I don't know. My mum always said I must have gotten the horse gene from her mother, who was, sort of grew up in the country milking cows and stuff, and was very horsey. But there's no one else in my family who's horsey. None of them. It's just me. Yeah. So just always wanted a horse, and eventually, I parents just knew nothing about horses. They really didn't. It wasn't their jam, and they didn't know anything. And eventually, of course, they sent me to a riding school somewhere, and I just begged and eventually got a horse, and it was an ex-racehorse, 17 high thoroughbred.
Big one.
And he was so, well, like in hindsight, I was so lucky. He was such a gentleman, really. He was just an amazing horse. And I had him, I think he died when I was like 31. Oh. And I didn't know. I was so completely heartbroken. I didn't know if I'd ever get another horse again. And then, of course, I did quite quickly. And I currently have 6. One is one's my son's pony, but she's living with a friend of mine at the moment who does equine therapy stuff. Oh, so we've got 5. I just had one that died just this month. Which
I'm
is really
sorry.
Sad. It was awful. But yeah, I don't know. I just no. There's nothing better than. There's nothing better than a horse, really.
I know.
I love all animals.
The smell of them. How gorgeous
oh my gosh.
is
it is. It's very tactile. And the wood shavings, like in your stable, and you're shoveling wood shavings. I even love the smell of manure. I know that's.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Most people understand, and it's completely different from cow manure, which stinks and is horrible. But I'm driving around at the moment with 3 bales of hay in the back of my car, and I just sit in the car going, I wish someone would make a cologne out of this. Like, it just smells or a room spray or something. I just love it. Love everything about
all
it.
of our cars have hay all the way through them. It's
I know.
I forget it's there, and then I go and pick someone up and think, oh no, this isn't a horsey person. They're going to think I'm absolutely horrible. But anyway, it is what it is.
And we got a new car. And my husband was like, do you reckon we could maybe keep the hay out of this one? And I just went, don't even try. Like, it's just not going to happen. So no, everything's it's always in my pockets. Is it always in your pockets? Like you go to put your washing on,
and
it's in the
and little
pockets,
bits
it's down your bra,
stuck in your pants. Yeah, I
yeah,
know.
it's everywhere.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, well, I love looking at all your horse pics on Instagram and on your Facebook page. So yeah,
Thank
keep
you.
them coming.
I have to restrain myself, otherwise I'd just be horses all day.
Yeah, that's all right. We just manage it. We manage that.
It's true.
So, Jo, you have started a podcast called Autist in Residence. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's great. I love that title. It's brilliant.
Thank you. I wasn't. There's no grand plans for that or anything. I just felt like I had a lot to say, and this is the thing. Like, I kind of, it's such an exciting big thing in my life. I want to talk about it a lot, and actually no one really wants to talk about it. So no one wants to talk about it, then I just have to talk myself. And I was like, I'll just put it on a podcast, and the people who want to listen to it will listen to it, but at least I've verbalized what it is that I want to say. And
well, that's the beauty of podcasts, isn't it? They're there, everybody can find them, they're evergreen. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So people can find you there for that podcast. And where can people find you online, Jo?
You can find me on Instagram, Instagram, Facebook, and my website's josephinemoon.com. And that's all. I'm not a Twitter person. I used to be a Twitter person, but I can't stand it, so I just deleted it.
It's very hard to keep up with it all on Twitter, I find.
It's just not enough words for me. I need more words.
That's right.
deep, meaningful conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on to Rights for Women and for sharing all that with us. I find it really interesting, and I love that you're sort of very, proud of the fact that you've had this diagnosis. You mentioned the fact that you were, when you got the diagnosis, it was congratulations, you're autistic. And I think you're such a fantastic role model for people out there, who maybe, have felt stigmatized and things through the years for being autistic or on spectrum or whatever it is. So
no, thank you for that. It's definitely, I look at young people and I just go, it's not up to them to change the world. Like we've had our time. Like it's up to us to change it for them. They don't need to be doing all that heavy lifting while they're also trying to go to school and uni and just start a life. Like it's just it should be there for them to step into. So that's my aim. Yeah.
Thank you, and good luck with the writing for the next book. We look forward to it.
Thanks so much.